everyone. We are back this week with another edition of Operation Gladio meets Secret Societies, highlighting Skull and Bones with Warhamster Brady. How are you, Warhamster?
I am surviving another week of brutal dental work. Got the wisdom teeth done Thursday and not too much swelling. So I think surprisingly, I'm good to go.
Cool. Well, I know everybody's been texting and DMing and everything about they couldn't wait for us to do our next edition. So here we are.
Yeah, I put out yesterday on my Rumble channel. I had done a friend had a small YouTube channel. He'd asked me and Douglas V. Gibbs to come on and talk about, we used to talk about Constitution stuff, but he was very interested in Freemasons and secret societies. So about 3 years ago, we did a small little video on his channel, audience of about 12 people. But I talked about the overlay of what secret societies are, got a little bit into Freemasons, and ended up with some real high view of Skull and Bones. So I put that up on my channel yesterday just to keep my audience that's starved for secret societies content mollified until we finally were able to get together this week.
Cool.
So that's a fun one. If anybody wants to go check it out, it's up on my Rumble right now. Today is going to be a pretty fun one. We're going to go into a couple of different directions or more depth into a direction we've already kind of touched on. Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right. So the first gentleman we're going to talk about from Skull and Bones is a guy by the name of David McCullough, Bonesman class of 1955. He is born in 1933 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, just an upper middle class background, nothing exciting. He's known to us because he was a very big writer and a popular historian. Won Pulitzer Prizes, National Book Award, and even got a 2006 Presidential Medal of Freedom for his writing. His books are interesting. He started out sort of as a disaster historian. He wrote about the Johnston Flood, the Great Chicago Fire, San Francisco earthquake. Those were all bestsellers. And then he tried to get away from disaster journalism and wrote about the Brooklyn Bridge. Then he gets into writing about biographies on historians. He wrote Mornings on Horseback, which is about Teddy Roosevelt's early years. He wrote an autobiography called Truman. He's the guy who wrote John Adams that became the HBO series, which I loved, by the way. I thought it was done very well historically. He also wrote the book that became another miniseries called 1776, which is about George Washington. He wrote about the Wright brothers. He's the narrator for Ken Burns in the Civil War series. And, well, we'll get to this big book, the one that we want to talk about at the end. So there's one other book we're going to mention. Are you with me so far?
I'm with you.
Have a prolific writer who's a Bonesman. And you see a lot, we talk about the Skull and Bonesman, these influential people. There's a lot of writers and a lot of people in media. And the reason for that is pretty obvious. They want to control the narrative.
They have to tell a story.
Exactly. All right, so he gets out of school and he gets hired to write for Sports Illustrated in 1956. For those who don't know, Sports Illustrated was founded in 1954 by Time Incorporated.
Of course it was.
Which, of course, was founded by Bonesman Henry Luce. The Wikipedia will tell you that Sports Illustrated was founded by a guy by the name of Stuart Sheftel, but Luce was in on it too. But Sheftel's interesting. He's the grandfather of Isidore Straus, who's the founder of Macy's, and his uncle Jesse Straus was an ambassador to France. So more of that diplomacy connection that we've been talking about just about every week. So he goes to prep school. When he gets out of college, he decides to go to Christ Church at Oxford. So he's another Oxford across Atlantic guy. And he starts writing for golf publications. Gets interesting, comes back and he starts and writes and edits it for the U.S. Information Agency in D.C. for 12 years.
Which is a CIA front.
Absolutely. They have admitted to being a propaganda agency that was there from 53 to 99.
Yes.
So we got a CIA propagandist. The former USIS posts became field operation officers of USAI. In 78, it merges in the Bureau of Cultural Affairs. Eventually, it becomes the USAGM, which we just mentioned a couple weeks ago with that lovely, another one of our lovely diplomats who's now running public Voice of America and PBS. So that's all connected there. When he was working with USAGM, the organization he's working for is the International Broadcasting Bureau, which is a division of USAGM. They gave tech support. They support day-to-day Voice of America operations and the operation of Cuba Broadcasting.
More CIA propaganda.
Yeah, I think we got a spook.
Mm-hmm.
Keep that in mind. So after about 12 years, he decides to become an independent journalist.
Independent.
Uh-huh. Well, when people ask him about current political affairs, whether Republican or Democrat, he always says, I specialize in dead politicians, not live ones, which is an excellent out, I think. In 1977, he writes the book, The Path Between the Seas, The Creation of the Panama Canal, 1870 to 1914. What do we know about the Panama Canal?
Oh, I know a lot about the Panama Canal. Way more than I want to know.
Sullivan and Cromwell was the law firm that basically helps Panama become annexed from Colombia. He writes about all that.
Does he actually tell the real story, or do you know?
Well, yeah, because I read a whole bunch of. I didn't read the book, but I read some cliff notes on it. So he makes a lot of use of letters and interviews with the actual participants and the surviving relatives, and he's trying to tell the personal side of what happened there. He talks about the difficulty of the French initial effort to build a Central American canal and about the 30,000 deaths, all that. He talks about the negotiation. He calls them negotiations with Colombia.
And does he talk about the whole actual false flag of the invasion by the Marines?
It appears he was calling that a negotiation.
Oh, okay. So again, we go back to he's telling a story, not the story.
Yeah, but it's an important story because, when we ceded control of Panama, we ceded control of the Canal to Panama. It was in 1977. Jimmy Carter says no treaties passing control of Panama would have been possible without McCullough's book. So he was very influential on that. And obviously, as you just pointed out, his book isn't telling the actual story, or the full story, I should say. McCullough himself would observe this is a direct quote, all through the Senate debate on the issue, this book was quoted again and again, and I'm pleased to say that it was quoted by both sides. Real history always cuts both ways. That's
so does fake history.
What's that?
So does fake history.
Exactly. Well, very much. It's an interesting point. So I bet if you go through his book, almost everything he says is historically accurate, and with some really good interviews, real stuff like that, good journalism. It's what he doesn't say.
Correct.
Yeah, it's what he leaves out.
And it's emotional blackmail as well. I mean, it's you have a way, and they're very good at it. You elicit all of the emotional stories and the personal tellings of these stories, but the people that were there did not know the entire sabotage of the railroad coming in and how the Rockefellers had this huge train, and suddenly it all breaks down and only one car can go, and it happens to be all the military leaders from Colombia, so they can all be captured by the U.S. Marines that have already came ashore. It's an entire story that no one there at the time knew about because, again, it was all classified, and decades later when it comes out, it's like this little blip and no one talks about it, so no one knows it.
We had a really good example of that just this week. Did you hear about the Joe Rogan interview where he moderated a debate between Dave Smith and I forget the name of the British guy? Did you
Yes.
watch that at all?
I watched clips of it. I did not watch the whole thing because I can't stomach that British guy.
Oh
Um,
God, yeah. I actually fought through about almost the whole thing, and then I watched Dave Smith's reaction to it afterwards. And I think Dave Smith should have gone off on the guy. He was being polite to Rogan, so he didn't. But in essence, this British guy comes on and starts haranguing Rogan and Dave Smith, saying, "You guys are platforming people that aren't experts, and only experts should be speaking." You know, by that logic, Roxanne, you and I shouldn't be able to talk about what we talk about. But I bring it up because he goes, well, because he's banging on one of the self-made historian that basically came out, got a lot of controversy, and I forget the guy's name right now, but he said Chamberlain wasn't exactly the hero of World. I'm not Chamberlain. Churchill wasn't exactly the hero of World War II. Well, this guy goes, he just wasn't having it. He's British establishment. He goes, how dare you have these dangerous thoughts out there that are going to, can make people do what's the word they look for? Radicalize the right. But he basically says, all you need to know is Churchill ended World War II. That's it. That's the facts. And I'm thinking to myself, well, there's a few more facts. If I was sitting there having a conversation, what about who financed the Bolsheviks and the Nazis in the first place? Why did World War I and World War II start? What was Churchill's role at the Treaty of Versailles? Can we have conversations about that? Or since we're not experts, do we just need to shut up and not ask questions? So, and that's exactly the guy, he's got a true story. Churchill helped end World War II. Great statesman. And he wants to leave it at that because they're the experts and we're not allowed to ask questions.
Yeah.
So I guess the point is the history we're told is quite often a lot more nuanced if you have the full truth.
Right.
All right. We've got another fun Bonesman. Guy by the name of R. Inslee Clark, Jr., Bonesman, class of 1957. He is born in 1935 in Garden City. I believe that's New Jersey. After college, he would earn a master's from the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University. So nothing too glorious about him so far besides he's a Bonesman. He becomes the director of undergraduate admissions at Yale from 1965 to 69. That's important because he's the guy who oversaw the school's transition to becoming co-ed. He was previously, the school had used what's quote, character as a code word to limit acceptances by Jews, blacks, and working class Catholics. This was Skull and Bones, or Yale's WASP-only policy, and he was working to change that in the 60s. So here's where it gets fun. After leaving the undergraduate admissions, and that's a pretty interesting role we should probably talk about, because we know getting into these Ivy League schools, particularly Yale, it's about who you know, who you're related to. And this is the guy who's in charge of that for a 5-year period. And as we know, with the way they select Skull and Bones is to kind of watch you for 3 years. But as we've pointed out, a lot of these people are groomed for this as far back as prep school.
Right.
And this is the guy selecting, of the best prep schools, who he's going to come to Yale. And obviously, he's always screening to see who's a possible Bonesman. Make sense?
Yes. I mean, because that's one of the things we definitely have highlighted throughout this entire series is they all attend prep schools.
Just about all of them, yeah.
Yeah. Just about all.
In fact, I actually pointed out when someone doesn't, if they went to a public school.
Because it's so unique.
Yeah, it really is. And we're going to talk a little about prep schools, and we're going to jump into this now. Because I think it really, if you look at this whole pipeline of how our country's run, by the intelligence agencies, the politicians, the legal system, all these hand-selected people that just get promoted to the best positions because of their connections, not because of merit. It starts with the prep schools, goes on to the Ivy League schools, particularly Harvard, Yale, the secret societies, and Skull and Bones in particular. From them, they go to Harvard. It's the same pipeline, Harvard Law, quite often, and they always end up in these key positions. But it does start at the preparatory school. So where does this guy go to work next? Well, he becomes the headmaster and the president of the Horace Mann School in the Bronx.
I know a few stories about that one.
Well, we're going to talk about it today. Good. That's good. Um, let's talk about Horace Mann first. He's the father, known as the father of American education. If you Google the father of American education, you'll see Horace Mann or you'll see Thomas Dewey. They have pretty much the same philosophy. If you go to YouTube, about the first 10 videos you'll see about Horace Mann are all just total puff pieces about this wonderful humanitarian education for the masses, all kinds of puff pieces, but it's not really the truth. So Horace Mann goes and visits what was now Germany in the late 1840s and early 1850s, and he loves what's called the Prussian School of Education. And the Prussians have been doing this for over 100 years. What the Prussian School of Education did is it basically sets up the grade level. Second grade, you've achieved these levels. Then you pass you on to third. Then you pass you on to fourth grade, et cetera, et cetera. Problem with that, it holds back the brighter students, and you also move forward students that haven't retained what they had. You move them on just because it's part of a calendar year. It's a lot of people in education have criticized it, especially in the homeschool and smaller school environment. They realize there's better ways of doing it, letting students advance at their own pace. But that's not the biggest crime of Horace Mann, of the Prussian School of Education. What it teaches is obedience to the state and trusting the experts. And that's our modern education system. And that's why you find people that can't think outside the box. They're in their bubble and they refuse to believe that they always trust authority. You know, it's one of the major reasons for the downfall of American culture was the Prussian education system that we live under. Anything to add on that?
No, I agree 100%.
So I am not a fan of Horace Mann, but they named the school after him. It's an important school. It's a member of what's known as the Ivy League Preparatory School League, which is a number of these private boarding schools that do nothing but prep you for Ivy League. And this one is rated the number one K through 12 private school by Niche. So Horace Mann School is no joke. Interesting little bit of scandal happened while he was there. There was a sexual abuse scandal in 2012. So let's see, this guy was in charge of undergraduate admissions, and now he's at a prep school, and now we have a sexual abuse scandal. And it was a big one. New York Times Magazine published an article by a former student which alleged multiple instances of sexual abuse of students by teachers. You know, they talk about how do we keep the Bonesman, how do you know they're going to keep their secrets? And, some of the narratives are they've got some occult rituals, and others say they're sexual rituals. This kind of leads into that second one, that maybe that's in play.
Well, and one of the things as part of this whole research project that I've been on, when you start coming to the blackmail piece of how they keep the whole wheel rolling down the road, what you find out, obviously, when we were doing Whitney Webb's book about blackmail and Jeffrey Epstein, of course, he was at his Bill Barr's dad had hired him at a prep school. And so I just started doing generic searches on pedophile, sex abuse, boarding school, prep school, and your results are in the thousands. And so you find out that there is, just like what we found out with the pedophilia in the Catholic Church, there is scandal after scandal after scandal. And what happens is it takes one horrific one for 300 to come out during the investigation of the one horrific one. And so you can imagine that the problem is much more extensive than we'll ever know, because of the secretness and the ability to hide it because of the people that you are dealing with. And so if you take a step back, you almost wonder if feeding your children into this system is not part of the process. Because you have to ask your question. These people are multi-generational. It's not that they don't know.
Yeah, we've had discussions on this with other people in the past, and it really, you got to look into someone's soul who would send their child into that experience.
Exactly.
I guess so they realize that's the price for fame and fortune, apparently, and power.
Yes.
But funny you would mention Bill Barr, because that name keeps coming up. So just the rest about the sexual abuse scandal, it was legit. A guy by the name of Tech Young Lin was an English teacher and a track coach. He admitted relations with several male students. 18 faculty members accused, spanning several decades, and the school has settled 27 out of 37 accusations. So it was legit. That was going on. So here we have the most impressive prep school in the country being run by a Bonesman. Let's talk about some of their famous alumni. And there's a lot, but you're going to be blown away. The first one I have on my list is none other than Bill Barr.
Of course.
Yeah, he's one of them. Alex Berenson.
Really?
Yep.
That's interesting. That is interesting.
Yeah, well, not all these people that go through these schools or even all the school in Bonesman end up being bad actors. I think some of them just don't have the mettle to go that direction, or Berenson may be more than meets the eye. I mean, he's wide awake on some issues and still has his eyes closed on others.
That's true.
So, yeah. Here's a couple of fun ones. Guy by the name of Alan Blinken, the ambassador to Belgium from 93 to 97. His brother, Douglas Blinken, who, of course, is the father of Anthony Blinken. Douglas was the U.S. ambassador to Hungary 1994 to 1997. So he's got one brother in Hungary and one in Belgium. His father was from Kyiv, Ukraine. What's Anthony Blinken doing?
The Blinkens were from there.
Yeah, well, Anthony Blinken, of course, says his fingerprints all over the Ukraine-Russia war. Think he's got an axe to grind?
Little bit.
From 2000 to 2004, Douglas Blinken was a Secretary General of the World Federation of the United Nations Associations.
Huh.
These are the NGOs that do everything from help with human trafficking to regime change. This guy is the Secretary General of overseeing the United Nations Associations. Anthony Blinken's father. So in 2015, George Soros's Open Society Archives in Hungary were renamed for the Donald Blinken Open Society Archives after a major donation from him and his wife. So a little deep state for the Blinkens, huh?
Yeah.
There is another interesting alumni by the guy by the name of Chao Chu-chi.
I know who he is.
Go ahead.
I just know him from, he was like the interpreter for Mao.
Not only Mao, but Zhao and Lei as well.
Yeah.
Your memory's awesome.
Well, the reason why I thought that was very interesting, and I didn't even know that he went to this school, but he was very Americanized. And I always thought that was odd if we're supposed to believe that China was communist China and we were supposed to be, we're all in on Chiang Kai-shek. Was this guy a spy? My mind always goes to those types of things because that's what we do when we want to indoctrinate. We send them to Oxford for the Rhodes Scholarship because they're going to be on a track to be somebody or something in this network in the international syndicate. And so what I have found very interesting is the people that we educate in the United States, they generally educate them in the United States so they can go back and play a covert role in their foreign country.
Yeah, and we're seeing that pop up in the news this last week, where the China and American exchanges they're starting to talk about kicking some students out and revoking visas. And I know China was just a number of years back, but I guess I don't know if it's official proclamation or it's understood that if you're a Chinese student residing in America, you are de facto an intelligence agent. You are
But
required.
right. But how crazy is this? The State Department, the USAID, the CIA all have scholarships to get foreigners to include China to come to America so they can co-opt them in as spies and send them back to their foreign country. So are we going to stop it, or do we just have a double standard that says China shouldn't do it? Because our people that we send over there, we try to indoctrinate them as well. We try to get them to spy on the foreign countries. That's the entire purpose of the Peace Corps and every other humanitarian thing that we do. We don't do a damn thing that's humanitarian. We do a bunch of shit that's spying called humanitarian.
Cultural exchange or cultural, whatever, you know what I mean?
The Congress for Cultural Freedom.
Well, that's what's pretty. So you have an interpreter for two chairmen of the Communist Party, of the CCP, is educated in America, rubbing shoulders with the future leaders of America.
Yes.
Which side is he on, though? So the question is, how do you know which side someone's going to be on? And isn't that not a recipe for a lot of double agents?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why I have now questioned everything I ever thought about the original Communist Party, because nothing makes any sense if you actually know the facts.
Yeah, and I agree with that to a certain degree, although I do acknowledge that there are a lot of these countries had true ideological Marxists, and that was behind that. But that doesn't take away from your major point that quite often.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm not saying they're good or bad. I'm just saying I question everything we were ever told.
Well, you're not an expert. How can you do that? By the way,
I have a few degrees on the wall.
What does it take to qualify as an expert? Does it just mean that you're saying the establishment, you're an expert as long as you agree with the establishment?
Well, that's what that guy. Yeah, that guy meant that.
I think he destroyed himself. That's most of the consensus opinion during that debate. I'm going to rewatch it again. I mean, it was like watching a car wreck in real time.
But isn't that what happens with every one of them, which is why they don't want to debate?
They don't want to debate the facts. They want to just use a bunch of ad hominem attacks and use false logic. And yeah. Well, how many people would debate you or I on this stuff? And I don't qualify as an expert. I just happen to read a little bit of history. Correct. All right, the next alumni of the Horace Mann is none other than Ray Cohn.
I saw that. Is that crazy?
Yeah, somewhat of a mentor to Donald Trump, but more importantly, he was an aide to Senator McCarthy and the lead prosecutor of the Rosenbergs.
He's been at the heart of so many things. He was best friends with Cardinal Spellman. He has played a central role in so many things.
Have you talked about Cardinal Spellman in detail?
I did when I was doing the book review on Whitney Webb's book.
Yeah, I figured that. Just for those who don't know, can you give a 30-second view?
Well, the 30-second view is he was in New York, the equivalent of the guy I've talked a whole lot about, Marcinicus in Chicago. They both had intimate ties with the mob and the underworld of both of those locations. Spellman basically was accused of being a pedophile and have frequented the Blue Suite, in the hotel in New York City, where supposedly the FBI director had been compromised. And then there were spy equipment set up in there so they could blackmail everybody as well.
Yeah, I had to read that chapter twice when I read Whitney Webb's book, and I went and checked all the sources on that, or a bunch of, because she always cites her sources. That story appears to be 100% true.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is scary. So that's Ray Cohn. He's, went to school there. Guy by the name of David Kornstein, who's another U.S. ambassador to Hungary, and I'm wondering why there's so much Hungarian connections, and then I think about George Soros.
Yes. Well, too, Look at where it's at geographically. It's another one of those thorns in Russia's side that they wanted to ensure they kept under Western influence.
Yeah, I would say that's accurate. Got another guy named Jerome Allen Danzig, and he was a reporter and a news producer, but most well known as being a personal advisor to none other than Nelson Rockefeller. Fun one, Valentine Davies, the guy who wrote Miracle of 34th Street. It's pretty cool. Guy named Peter Deutsch, the former Florida congressman.
Oh, yeah. Can we talk about him for a minute?
Go for it.
So he's very interesting. I came across him a couple of different times in some of my. Of course, he graduated from Yale too. That's where he went to law school, and he. Let's see. To me, his big thing is, you know how they use the committees to bury stories, right? So he was on the investigative committee that investigated Enron. And as we know, Enron was basically, as far as I'm concerned, just like the SNL, it's just another money laundering opportunity for the syndicate. But also, he was on the investigation into Firestone tire issues. And Firestone, of course, is one of the international syndicate members that keeps coming up over and over and over again. He was also... Huh?
Because of rubber. The rubber trade.
Correct. He was also on the Martha Stewart stock trading case.
I didn't see that.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, he is a very, very interesting guy when it comes to, Anyway.
Got a comment from our good friend Ron Partain. He says the UK guy was Douglas Murray. Thanks, Ron. Ron says, I don't like his stance on Israel. He now deserves a ton of scrutiny. I found his book, War on the West, to be solid, but I guess it needs some reevaluation now. Excellent, Ron. Thanks for the comment.
Deutsch also moved to Israel after he got out of business. Just FYI.
Yeah. Was he Jewish by birth?
I assume he is.
We got another alumni of the Horace Mann School by the name of Morris Leopold Ernst. He's the co-founder of the ACLU. Lovely. We got Mark Fisher, who's an editor for WAPO, Washington Post. Here's one of my favorites. Carl Gershman, also known as the very first president of the National Endowment for Democracy in 1984.
Yeah, I recognize his name.
Yeah, he's a former counselor to the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. He was the UN Security Council under Reagan. He's a resident scholar at Freedom House. Went to Yale, but no Skull and Bones.
They seem to have something in common, because here's another one that is on that list, Jennifer Fleiss, Fleiss. She also graduated with her bachelor's degree from Yale, and then later attended Harvard. Normal. And she co-founded a thing called Rent the Runway, which is very interesting. Because she also started her career at Morgan Stanley and then moved to Lehman Brothers. So, yeah, just these people have very fascinating careers, and they're in every facet of American society at the upper echelons.
You don't see a ton of engineers, but yeah, they find their way into engineering schools. I think Gershman gets fascinating because he worked in research for B'nai B'rith, which is, of
Oh,
course, yeah. This is about almost 2 century old organization that's basically committed to the security and continuity of the Jewish people in the state of Israel. And their roots stem from a system, this is a direct quote, stem from a system of fraternal lodges in the late 19th century. Little secret society action from B'nai B'rith.
a little bit.
This guy's involved in research for them. He's also the executive director for the Social Democrats USA from 74 to 80, and he's the editor of a magazine called Dissent, and that is a far left rag. So that's Carl Gershman. Like that first president of the National Endowment of Democracy. A few other alumni, a lot more. There's actually a lot more. I want to go through them all if that's okay. That's about another 15 or so. We have the famous Jack Kerouac, the writer for beat literature, cultural icon. We had Herbert Kramer, who's a director at the Office of Economic Opportunity. That's LBJ's office directing the Great Society legislative agenda, which is, of course, the driver of the war on poverty.
Yes.
Nixon would try to disband the Office of Economic Opportunity. He failed. It was dismantled by Reagan in 81, and it was moved into the Department of Homeland Security. Or, sorry, the DHHS, the Health and Human Services. But this is Kramer. So he is a social engineer. Oh, another fun one. Ira Levin, the author of Rosemary's Baby and Stepford Wives.
Yeah, what's up with that one?
It's just the literary, who knows? But, not everybody who goes to these schools is going to be a rotten apple.
No, but I mean, I don't know. Have you ever watched the Stepford Wives? It's basically 1984 on steroids.
I've never seen it. I don't watch that kind of TV.
Oh my gosh. As a matter of fact, it's funny because if you go to Disney and you go to, oh shoot, I'm going to forget the name of it. The community that they built just outside of Disney World, it looks like the community from Stepford's Wives. It's the scariest damn thing you've ever been in.
Okay. I will take your word for it.
Holy crap.
Well, okay. Well, I'm glad I brought him up. Another fun one, David Mandel, the producer of Curb Your Enthusiasm. It just goes to show you these people, whether it's, anything malicious about what they did for a living, just the people they meet in their prep schools just lets them get into these positions, being very influential for good, better, and different.
But by controlling art, you control culture. By controlling what people watch in the movies, you control culture. So I think these are their propagandists.
Quite often.
Yeah.
We got James Murdoch, son of Rupert Murdoch. We got Rebecca, and by the way, he's a bad apple. We got Rebecca Oppenheimer, graduated there in 1990. She's also obviously a daughter or granddaughter of Oppenheimer himself. She's also an astrophysicist, someone to keep an eye on. Someone named Generoso Pope Jr. He's the founder of National Enquirer and American Media, Inc.
Again, culture.
Uh-huh. You got Paul Rappaport, who's the co-founder of New York City's LGBT efforts. Because, of course.
Can I talk just real quick about General Thomas Power, which I actually am surprised that his name is on here, although everything about the military surprises me these days. I had heard about him. I obviously have read a lot of military history, and his career is quite amazing because he was early on. He ends up being the commander of Strategic Air Command at the end of the 1950s. He is very well known of having been at a lot of the original first in the Air Force as the different missions that they flew and stuff like that. So he's kind of a big deal. But Yeah, I'm shocked to see his name on there, actually.
Did he go straight from prep school to military academy?
Let's see. It doesn't say where he got his commission. It says that he attended the Barnard Prep School in New York and then entered the United States Army Air Corps and got his rating as a second lieutenant. So, yeah, I don't know.
Okay. All right, going a little further down the list, we've got, of course, Renee Richards, the tennis player and trans rights activist. Thought that was fun. We've got Barry Scheck, who's on the O.J. Simpson defense team.
Controlling culture.
We've got James Schlesinger, Secretary of Defense for both Nixon and Ford and Secretary of the Energy under Carter. You got Mark Penn and Doug Schoen, who co-founded the polling firm PSB Research. They were a Clinton client. They were the ones who put out the Clinton polls. Very close. Doug Schoen, you can still see in the news all the time. And his polls have been awful the last 3 cycles.
Yep. Controlling the narrative.
Mm-hmm. You've got Noah Shachtman. This list is long, but it's worth it. Editor of the Daily Beast. Culture. Eliot Spitzer, Governor and AG of New York.
Oh my gosh.
Arthur Hayes Sulzberger, publisher of the New York Times.
Yep, I recognize that name.
Yeah, Robert Tishman and Jerry Speyer. They co-founded Tishman Speyer, which is a real estate conglomerate which sits at 45 Rockefeller Plaza, and some of their purchases are pretty awesome. They own the Messeturm, which is the tallest tower in Western Europe, 70 floors, along with Travelers Insurance, who we've talked about before. They're the ones who bought the Chrysler building.
Yep.
They bought the Rockefeller Center in 2000, the MetLife building in 2005, and along with BlackRock, they acquired the Stuyvesant town in New York, which of course was surrendered to the lenders in 2010, so that one went bust. And most recently, they sold 666 Fifth Avenue to Jared Kushner's companies in 2006.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's a pretty good resume of real estate. Okay, last one from there is someone named Gideon Rose. The name ring a bell?
Not off the top of my head.
Gideon was twice the editor of the magazine Foreign Affairs, which is the publication of the Council of Foreign Relations, which of course he was a member of. And the person he replaced as the editor was none other than Fareed Zakaria.
Yeah.
That Gideon Rose. He was
on the National Security Council, right?
He was Clinton's national security director. Yeah, he was the NSC, not director.
Okay.
He was associate director for Near East and South Asian affairs in 94 and 95.
When we were selling all of our secrets to China? Or giving them away, actually.
Well, it says Near East. Isn't that former Soviet bloc?
Oh, maybe.
And South Asian would be basically Saudi Arabia or throughout Vietnam, gets over into India. But I'm thinking it's 94, 95. He's probably very much involved with the former Soviet bloc countries. And that's right when Clinton is basically starting to expand NATO.
And he's a scroll and key guy?
Bingo. Went to Yale, scroll and key. So that's your Horace Mann Prep School, top prep school in America.
Now you know why.
Would you send your kid there?
No.
Another Bonesman worth mentioning was Ord Musgrave Combs, Bonesman 1965. He's important because he's the first black Bonesman. He was born in St. Vincent, the island, in 1939, and he became an editor for Doubleday and Company and later for McCall Corporation. But first time we actually had a non-white Bonesman. All right. yesterday you tweeted something out, and see if I find it. Got it up here. You had a long tweet, and it mentioned many other programs, including the Boren Scholarship for students studying the languages of the countries deemed potential threats to U.S. national security, including Persian, Russian, Turkish, Chinese, were set up by the funding of the CIA. We're about to jump into the Boren family, and I saw that the tweet of yours mentioning the Boren Scholarship. I said to you, I tweeted back, haven't we just discussed that recently? No, we hadn't, because it was on the list I was getting ready to talk about. So amazing how that happens, huh?
I was like 24 hours ahead of you.
You were. If we'd done our regularly schedule on Thursday, we would have talked about Boren.
True. Touche.
Okay, so David Lyle Boren. Let's pull his picture up. I got to be quicker at this, don't I? There he is. That is David Lyle Boren. Now, why do we care about him? Well, quite a few reasons. He was Skull and Bones, class of 1963. He was born in 1941 in Washington, D.C. The reason he was born in Washington, D.C. is his father was Lyle Borden, who we'll show you real quick. Here's Lyle. He looks like a serious man.
Yep.
Why do we know Lyle? Well, he was a U.S. House member, House of Representatives for Oklahoma from 1937 to 47. He's known as a small government Democrat from Oklahoma. These are Democrats. When he got left in 47, and a lot of it had to do, he was anti-union, and he actually lost a primary to someone who was pro-union. So he was a little bit of a maverick of a Democrat, but he stayed really active in Oklahoma politics. Fun fact, his sister is the one who wrote Heartbreak Hotel for Elvis Presley.
Ooh.
Yeah. In 1938, Boren told his fellow congressman, this is a direct quote, "The greatest problem in America today is to erase the question in the minds of men, what is the government going to do for me? And replace it with the question, what can I do for my country?" Does that sound familiar to you?
Yeah.
Yeah, JFK plagiarized him. All right, and that's Lyle Borden. He was pretty well known as a centrist Democrat, which you have to be because your constituency in Oklahoma is mostly going to be conservative. But obviously, he was a mover and shaker in Oklahoma for a long time. David Lyle Boren, who was the second one we looked at, he's the Bonesman, also has a son who's notable enough to show his picture because you may recognize him. And here he is. This is Dan Boren. Now, he's been on your TV screen a lot in the last 20 years. And there's a reason for that. He's an interesting guy. He's born in 1973 in Shawnee, Oklahoma. You can tell he's got a little bit of American Indian to him. Goes to school at Texas Christian and got his MBA from Oklahoma. This whole time he's a staffer for Congress and Senate, so he's rubbing elbows with the D.C. crowd because of his father and grandfather. He would become the Democrat U.S. rep from Oklahoma from 2005 to 13. So in recent times, he was at the U.S. House of Representatives from Oklahoma. Sat on some interesting committees: Committee of Armed Services, Committee of Natural Resources, the Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence. When he was on that, he was on the subcommittee on terrorism, human analysis, and counterintelligence. This is 2005 to 2013. He's on this committee. What is going on with that the PSCI is looking at this point in time?
Well, from 2005 to 2013, they're basically doing all of their Iraq, the Arab Spring.
Arab Spring is what I was getting at.
Well, but all of that. I mean, Afghanistan. He would know about every because in order to, the whole reason they set up that committee is so that when the president signs findings about assassinating foreign heads of state, that they get briefed. So he knows about all of that.
Yeah, and let's just say this is the House version of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence is almost as bad in terms of knowing all the dirt. So he's basically was trusted for the obvious reasons.
And what in his background gave him the bona fides to be on the Intel committee?
Yeah, especially when you get into what his dad did. So his dad, the Bonesman, we'll get there.
Okay.
He was co-chair and whip for the Blue Dog Coalition, so he is a centrist, just like his grandfather. He was one of 40 Democrats to vote against the Affordable Care Act. In 2008, he was elected to the board of directors of the National Riflemen's Association. And he voted
that's
against,
required from Oklahoma.
Yeah, I would think so too. And of course, he was against the Iraq surge when they wanted to escalate that. So kind of a centrist political, but obviously a player.
So are you going to mention that his first cousin is married to Paul Ryan?
That was the mic drop.
Oh, well, I'm sorry. I thought we were moving on back to his dad. Sorry.
Nope, not quite yet. No, his first cousin was Jenna Little Ryan, is married to former Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan.
That's freaking crazy.
Yeah, it's funny. He's married to a woman named Andrea Heupel, who's the sister of Josh Heupel, the quarterback of the 2000 Oklahoma National Championship football team. So fun stuff. And also another fun family connection is his maternal grandfather helped found the American Party that supported George Wallace in 1968. So basically, we're talking about the family that is probably the deep state of Oklahoma politics, 3 generations worth. And what is he doing now? He's the president of corporate development for the Chickasaw Nation. And anybody knows, well, if you're in California and Oklahoma, you definitely know these things, a few other states, but tribal politics is big business. In California, the second biggest lobbyist group in the state are the Indian gaming casinos. And basically the politicians do whatever the heck they want. And most of the people on the reservations don't get a penny of it. So, and this guy's put himself in that position. So it is not a position I really admire.
Well, also, I just need to mention the fact that apparently on these Indian reservations, there's a lot of nefarious things that go on because they're a very closed, self-policed entity as well. I mean, that's where we found some of the shenanigans of the government, nefarious pieces of the government trying to manufacture weapons and all kinds of different things. Pinkerton presence there, labs of various varieties. So that's a very interesting connection too.
Yeah, and you think about this. This guy stepped down from a prominent seat in Congress to work for the Chickasaw Nation.
So again, I would say that there's a lot. So hear me out. He sits on the Intelligence Committee, which controls what parts of Operation Gladio they do officially. And then he moves to an Indian reservation supervisor kind of thing. So that probably bears some further investigation.
Yeah, I'd say so. So let's go back to our Bonesman. Now we know about his son and his father. This is David Lyle Boren. He attends public schools in Seminole, Oklahoma, and Bethesda, Maryland. Goes to Yale, studies American history with honors. He's a member of the Yale Conservative Party, family of Democrats, but a member of the Yale Conservative Party. And he was ROTC. Gets done with school and gets done with Yale and becomes a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. What were you saying earlier about the cultural exchange?
Sounds like Bill Clinton.
He comes back, gets his, we're going to spend a lot of time on the Rhodes Scholarship and when we jump across the Atlantic. So I'm just going to parse over it now, but that's a very significant thing when our Bonesmen go to Rhodes, go to Oxford. That's significant.
Because it's almost like its own private college kind of version.
Yeah, it's
private schools. Yeah, it's a prep for bigger and better things.
And when we talk about Cecil B. Rhodes, we'll go really deep into why he offered the scholarship and actually how well that's performed in terms of grooming. Basically the predecessor for the World Economic Forum's young global leaders. That's what the Rhodes Scholars are. He comes back to Oklahoma, gets his JD in law at the University of Oklahoma. He's the captain of the Oklahoma National Guard for about 10 years, and he serves 4 terms in the Oklahoma State House. Probably pretty easy to get elected with his father being basically the what's the word we look for, the puppet master of Oklahoma politics. In 1974, he defeats a Republican by the name of Jim Inhofe for the Oklahoma governor. And at 33 years old, he's the youngest governor in Oklahoma history.
Wow.
Yeah, in the 1970s, a big energy crisis going on. He's arguing for deregulation. And he was correct, by the way. Runs for U.S. Senator in 1978. And that was a tough election. He had to, first of all, he's accused of being a Republican. And so he had to swear on a biography of Truman that he wasn't a Republican. Then he gets accused of being gay, so he swears on a Bible that he was never gay. But he ends up getting elected as senator in 1978. And again, he's known...
He's already been governor.
Yeah. 4 years of governor, now he's a senator.
And they make him go through all that to be a senator? Wouldn't they let him be his governor?
It's a pretty nasty primary, apparently, in the Democrat Party, and it's because he was a centrist. The union people in Oklahoma do not like centrists.
But doesn't that tell you everything about the importance of us being a senator versus being the governor, where it should be asked backwards?
Yeah, I've had a lot of conversations about that. When Trump was talking about Carrie Lake's a great example. Everyone says, "Oh, it's great. She's going to take a position as senator," or before that, and then the governor. I go, "No, I'd rather stay as governor, where she can do a lot more good." The governor has got a whole lot more power than a senator, or should.
It should, but if you look at the progression, the senator should groom you to be the governor, not the other way around. But they have flipped our entire system upside down because, of course, better than most, the senator basically used to work for the governor. Yeah,
well, DeSantis went from the House to the governor, and now he's probably going to go for a Senate seat. I don't know if he will or not. But, we just need to move back towards federalism and state sovereignty where the governor will be more powerful. And I've been barking up that tree for a long time, especially during COVID. I wanted to see governors stand up against the stuff, and we didn't have enough of them. I don't think a single governor in America performed during COVID lockdowns up to par.
Can you talk for just a second? I have to take my camera off for just a second. I have an unexpected guest. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back.
You are back.
I'm sorry, but not to break my son-in-law just showed up with my grandson, and he has his first ever raised jersey on, and they just came into the door, and it just melts my heart every time I see him. So
that's about as good an excuse as possible.
Okay, go ahead.
And I get to edit this out when I put the recording on my channel. Okay, where were we? Okay, I just pontificated on about emergency powers and governors and that stuff, but we can get back on track. Okay, so he's known as a centrist. A couple examples. He voted for Robert Bork for the Supreme Court justice. He was one of only 2 Democrats to do that. He voted against the 91 Gulf War. He was actually one of Clinton's finalists to be the Secretary of Defense. William J. Perry got the job, and that's interesting because we know Perry is now a fellow at none other than Stanford's Hoover Institution. When he was in the Senate, he was known as a protege of Lloyd Benson. How well do you know Lloyd Benson?
I mean, not really well, but I do want to say something about the Secretary Perry. So when my ex was on the SecDef staff, Secretary Perry, while he was there, he hosted a Christmas party for his staff and a summer picnic. And he actually spent a lot of time with the staff there. So had he got selected, I'd have got to meet him.
And of course, he's at the Hoover Institute now, which is, of course, a CIA bastion at Stanford.
Yeah.
But where was he? Okay, so Lloyd Benson. He was a protege of Lloyd Benson. You talk about his father being like the kingmaker in Oklahoma. Well, Lloyd Benson was Texas politics for a couple of decades. Him and LBJ were Texas politics. You could do an entire show on the corruption around Lloyd Benson, but having many generations of Texas family, this is a household name there, or was.
Right, absolutely.
Yep. Interestingly enough, when Barry Goldwater actually wanted him to be his VP, Barry Goldwater actually wanted him to run for president, like in 2012 or something like that, or way back. So Goldwater was a fan of this guy, a Democrat, which is interesting. And of course, he sat on the committees. He sat on the Senate Committee on Finance. He was the chairman of the SSCI, Select Committee on Intelligence, from 1987 to 93. That's tied with Dianne Feinstein for the longest tenure as the chair of the SSCI in history.
So give me the dates again.
87 to 93.
87 to 93. Which means all of Bush Sr.'s time and the Iraq War.
Bingo. So he knows all the secrets.
Yeah.
He's actually, when he's sitting on this position, he became an informal emissary to Nicaragua during the Contra insurgency.
Holy crap.
Yeah. He was instrumental in the release of Nelson Mandela. He leaves the Senate and becomes the president of the University of Oklahoma from 1994 to 2018. He was on the board of directors to Texas Instruments, AMR Corporation, which was American Airlines parent company. Mean anything to you? Always the airlines. When he was the board of directors, he left the university as a board of directors because of a sexual harassment scandal. There were no findings, but several accusations. In 96, Ross Perot wanted him to be his VP running mate, but he declined. And he was the mentor to former CIA head George Tenet. That's interesting because they were having breakfast together on September 11th, 2001, when Tenet had to leave because of the buildings, the World Trade Center.
Okay. So the guy that was in charge of the Senate Intel for the longest time is having breakfast with the CIA director when 9/11 happens.
Can't make this stuff up, can you?
And he's a Bonesman.
Yes. Hey, Ron, do you have that in your 9/11 research?
Oh my God.
9/11 has always been Ron's litmus test for whether someone's a true researcher or not. If you don't talk about 9/11, I'm giving him a hard time. But just rehash that one more time. Say that again for effect.
So, again, and not just him, his dad. And was it his son? So this is a long list of people with state secrets. right? And he's the longest serving Senate intelligence chief that, again, has to be briefed. That's part of the Gang of Eight, has to be briefed. If you're assassinating foreign heads of state, if you're going to overthrow governments, all of this shit. And doing both domestic terror events, foreign terror events, which we know the CIA does. They have to come brief these people. And he happens to be having breakfast with the current CIA director when what I absolutely believe is a false flag under Operation Gladio occurred in the United States of America on 9/11 in order to further push the Patriot Act, which had already been written, by the way, and all of the other surveillance state control mechanisms. The two of them are having breakfast together while it happens. Probably watching it happen.
Yep, that's what I think. That's why I left that one out there for you. Fun stuff. Do you want to touch on that Bourne? Well, let me just give you one more factoid about David Lyle. He was also the co-chair of Obama's Intelligence Advisory Board. And the poor gentleman left us, died from diabetes just last month at the age of 83.
So again, God, it just keeps up. Okay, so the U.S. President's Intelligence Advisory Committee, you guys remember me telling the story of the 4512-2 National Security Action Memorandum, where they had all of these different, and I go through them quite often. They had like the 40 committee, the 30 committee. There was different names throughout history, starting from Truman on, of the body that met that kind of gave the president independent input from the intelligence. Generally, a lot of business, like the International Syndicate, that's kind of how they got their inputs in this capacity. So President Obama had this same guy who, Bonesman, Intel, longest serving Intel Senate guy, watching 9/11 happen with the CIA director at breakfast, puts him on his Presidential Intelligence Advisory Committee for all of the shit, which they turn around with the drones and they start droning American citizens in Yemen with no due process whatsoever, and droning entire wedding parties around the world. All of the crap that happened, the regime changes that happened during Obama, the entire Arab Spring would have been briefed to this advisory panel.
That's the guy. What I find interesting also is that on that 9/11 story, this is a Democrat, high-ranking Democrat senator, sitting down with a Republican appointed CIA director while 9/11 is going down. And if what we're suggesting is accurate, and I think it is, but once again, this is not a partisan issue of right versus left. This is about power.
There is no such thing as R's and D's or right and left. And we've proven that unequivocally.
I would agree. Well, that is all I've got for today. Did you want to talk a little bit more about how you found that Boren scholarship, and is that related to these guys?
I found it, probably not right now, just because I'm not prepared. I found all of that information when I was doing research for the book that we're doing at 4:00. All of that information, and again, just so that those of you who may not follow those shows that will be seeing this show, the most important part of the current book that we're reviewing had to do with the incorporation of unions into this entire Operation Gladio scheme of things. I had not seen to date in any of the books, and I've got probably 20 here that I haven't read yet. I That was kind of lacking in my repertoire. So if you look at the National Endowment for Democracy and you see the R&Ds, again, to our point we just made, the International Republican Institute, the Democrat National Institute had slush funds under the National Endowment for Democracy that Reagan gave them. And they also had a union one and a chamber one. Well, we know what the chamber, because it's, the international syndicates rep in this whole little dirty cesspool. But the fact that the union one had one, and I had done some work in the book on Nelson Rockefeller called Thy Will Be Done, it goes into him using the unions down in South America to break up the trade. The people that were trying to unionize and getting paid more than 87 cents a day out of the Rockefellers and Sullivan and Cromwell clients that were in business down there. And so I knew it was a thing, but when I read this book, it goes into names and dates and details, not only just of our own union efforts here and how they totally were sabotaged, but also every one of those unions had an international body, and all of them were compromised. And they did it through the use, as we have seen, through scholarships and all kinds of other processes like that. I'll go back and look at that and see if I can tie those two together.
Yeah, it's just another example of how the game really is played, and it's obviously completely different than what that British idiot said. Trust the experts.
Right. But what do we know? We're not experts.
Yep. Well, what do we talk about today? We talked about prep schools and how they prepared these people to be the masters of the universe and rulers of the world. We talked about the pedophilia that goes on. We talked about how the intelligence agencies work, or how these people get put in their positions to be always, just like Forrest Gump, always in the right place at the right time when something's going crazy. So
you just made me think of something. We need to have the He-Man and She-Ra dolls to talk about the masters of the universe. Oh, because what was the name of the castle? Wasn't that Skull?
Castle Grayskull.
Skull was the name of the
it's Castle Grayskull or something like that.
See, there you go.
All right, I'll go shopping. I don't have my dolls in my collection anymore.
All right. Thank you for bringing all of this information, Brady. Obviously, this is such a great thing for me to be able to learn all of this stuff from you and bring this to our audience as a collective of how these different, here's all the historical facts and how they play off of the operational piece of it.
Yeah, it's so complimentary to the work you're doing. It really was a good idea by both of us. I think putting our ideas together makes them both stronger.
I agree.
And we've got a lot more to go. So.
And Brady's going to be putting out some more material next week because he's going to be.
Go ahead.
Well, you said Alexis is going to be traveling, and so you're going to have more time on your hands. So
I will. Yeah, I'm a bachelor for a whole week, and it's weird since we've been joined to the hip the whole pretty much every day for 2 years straight. So.
Yeah, so we'll have to figure out some other show we can do.
Sounds good to me. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Have a nice weekend.
Cheers.